Sure.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today for our Capital Crimes April meeting. My name is Jennifer Marita, and I'm filling in for our president, Claire Booth, today because her latest Hank Worth mystery, Home Fires, just came out, and she has a book signing at Face in a Book in El Dorado Hills today from 4 to 6 p.m. So if you're in the Sacramento area, please be sure to stop by, buy her book, get it signed. I just started it and I'm blown away. She's a very talented writer, so it'll be a really great event today. Hope to see you there. I wanted to start off with a couple of announcements. So, Capital Crimes has officially opened to submissions for our 2024 Farm to Foul Play short story anthology. I'm told we have a few stories already. We also have a fantastic lineup of judges. So, you have until May 31st to get your stories in. Please be sure to go to our website for all the rules and guidelines, and that's www.capitalcrimes.org. April 27th is Independent Bookstore Day. We have an amazing list of local independent bookstores on our website, so check it out and go visit a few. Many of them are doing special promotions for the day. They're having prizes, games, special events for children. So be sure to look that up. There are actually several in Sacramento that have joined together and they're doing like a passport promotion where you can pick up a passport at one bookstore and then have it stamped at every bookstore that you go to that day. And you probably get some prize or something. So that's April 27th. Speaking of local bookstores, our next in-person event is Crime Time at Wild Sisters Books, which is in East Sacramento. That is going to be on May 5th, which is a Sunday at 2 p.m. It's just a bunch of crime writers getting together to talk about writing or book conferences or our favorite authors, whatever. And it's a great way to also do a little shopping at the local independent bookstore. Um, our next members meeting is Saturday, May 18th, on Zoom, and it will be featuring three independent publishing houses, the editors and the publishers, including Sean Riley Simmons from Level Best Books, Jennifer McCord from Camel Press, and Ocean View Publishing's Faith Matson. They're going to talk a little bit about what the industry is like these days, what kind of writers or authors, books they're looking for, as well as ways you can reach out to them because several publishing houses accept unagented submissions from unagented authors. So, and it includes some of these editors. Okay, first, now we have to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our special guest, Karl Henwood. Please be sure to mute yourselves and turn off your video to make it easier for everybody to see and hear him. If you have any questions for Harriet during his presentation, sorry. If you have any questions for Karl during his presentation, please put them in the chat and Harriet will be sure to take notes so we can ask him at the end of his presentation. Um, it's my pleasure to introduce our featured guest speaker, Karl Henwood, who will be talking to us about how to accurately incorporate firearms in our writing. I met Karl last year when I participated in his Writer's Range Day. I knew nothing about guns. I'd never held one, certainly never shot one before, but I knew I would need to in order to continue writing mysteries. He and his friend Robert McAdams were incredibly kind and generous and really helpful. They're very knowledgeable. So I felt much more comfortable about writing about guns in my books. Just a little bit about Karl. He grew up in Davis and earned a degree in history from the University of Portland in Oregon via ROTC. He was a U.S. Army armor officer, and for 18 years he planned and employed weapons ranging from the 99 millimeter pistol to the 155 millimeter heavy artillery. He even handled the cannon on an Abrams tank. Karl is an Iraq veteran who was deployed from 2010 to 2011 and briefly served as a patrol officer in Oakland. He's also an expert in coffee logistics and writes science fiction fantasy novels. He currently lives in Boise, Idaho with his wife, son, daughter, and 2 dogs. Thank you so much for being here today, Karl. And I need to try and find you here so I can spotlight you. Let's see. Oh, there you are. Okay. Spotlight. Great. So can everybody see Karl on the big screen? Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
I am not exactly a Zoom expert, so let's see how this goes. Everyone see the big slideshow? Perfect. Okay. The technology appears to be cooperating today, unusually. All right, launch into this thing. Hello, everyone. I'm Karl Henwood. I am, as she said, a veteran and was very briefly a cop in Oakland. And I'm here today to talk to you about writers and guns, specifically how to get it right for your readers. If you all notice me staring off to one side, it's because Zoom puts the portraits of everyone on the right side of my screen that makes me look away from my camera, which makes it look like I'm giving you all a wicked side eye, but I'm actually just trying to see your faces, so bear with me. So some brief expectation setting for this presentation. I will run through it in about 45 minutes, which should leave us 15 or 20 minutes for questions afterwards. And I got crazy with the PowerPoint slide designer because it throws pretty good ideas at you. So, you know, this will be fancy. It won't just be a white background. Not that that really helps. For questions, if you have them, please throw them in the chat. And depending on if, they come up more than once, I might pause and answer them if someone else could bring them to my attention. Barring that, we'll save them up and I'll answer them first at the end. So for Zoom presentation flow reasons, we're trying not to get too bogged down in that. So moving boldly on, let me start my timer here so I don't lose track. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so before we get any further into this, before I start to lose people, I'd like to plug the range day, which is what was mentioned earlier. It is next month on the 19th of May, north of Marysville, California. So not far from Sacramento, an hour, give or take. And it takes place on the Henwood Ranch, which is our family ranch. This will be the third iteration we've done of it. The idea came to me when I was at the San Francisco Writers Conference, listening to some people talk about how hard it is to do writing events unless you happen to be relatively well-to-do and also have a lot of free time on your hands. This is designed for specifically not gun people, and it is meant to be accessible to everyone, regardless of your financial status and how much time you have. It's not like a writer's retreat where it takes multiple days. You're there and out from late morning to late afternoon, and there's no other time requirement, including this presentation. People don't actually have to have seen it. It's specifically designed not for gun people. So one, it teaches everything sort of from the ground up, and two, it does not have any of the weird cultural trappings often associated with firearms that I find very unfortunate. We'll get a little into that later in the presentation, but you don't have to know about guns. And if you aren't comfortable with guns, this is specifically designed for you. With that in mind, it's very safety focused. I have been running ranges for the military, so firing ranges my entire career. It's a basic officer skill that everyone is expected to be able to do. And the entire flow of the range is designed to ensure that no accidents happen. It's 100% hands-on. So you will fire and you will load and fire every weapon that is out there. You will use real bullets to do it, and you will get hands-on instruction on the correct techniques for doing so. The price is $20 a head, but it is scholarships are available. Not only will we waive the attendance fee, we will also, if you have trouble getting money to travel, we'll happily help you out with gas. We'll give you a scholarship with that. Maybe also get you a ride with someone else. I'm willing to do that coordination on the back end. Again, the idea is that people who are not necessarily independently wealthy and footloose and fancy free can attend. So please apply, even if you don't think that you would normally get to do writing stuff. And finally, you can apply and ask to bring someone else. Just let me know who they are, and we'll work out the details on the back end. So if you particularly want to bring someone, either they're your friend or they help you out, some kind of caretaker, they make you feel safe or whatever, just let me know. They don't have to have seen this presentation. And if you need other accommodations like mobility or anything like that, again, let me know. We will make it work. Once you apply, I'll hit you up with more details. But again, about an hour from Sacramento, out on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, safety oriented by someone who's been running firearm ranges for 2 decades. And while it is $20 a head, that is completely waiverable. And also, to be clear, that $20 is not for profit. It doesn't go into my pocket. It goes towards ammunition and operating costs. We don't make money off this thing. So reach out if this is something you would be interested in. We've gone to all the trouble of putting it on, and I'll be sad if no one attends. Moving on into the presentation itself, me as a writer, the bio I got or introduced with there earlier was pretty thorough on my background, but I want to explain because this is relevant to the rest of the presentation. I am a writer. I have 2 manuscripts that I've completed. One never went anywhere on query, my very first. My second, real life exploded in 2020. My daughter was born premature in the middle of COVID and messed everything up. But that second manuscript is about to go on query after a very long delay. I don't have anything published, though, not so much as a short story. That said, I've done some reading on craft of writing. I've been to the San Francisco Writers Conference and attended the curriculum there twice. I've read for other people, and I've actually been paid to do reading on a couple of occasions. We'll get into that later as well. But I'm not ignorant of writing, so I've tailored this presentation as best I can to writers, not just to be about guns. The second thing, and I'll recap this at the end, but I've had multiple people basically punch me in the face and say, you should charge for this. This presentation in the range day, again, is not for profit, but I've decided to hang out a shingle and see if anyone wants brainstorming help, reader for accuracy for military or firearms related things. Read widely myself, and I am at least familiar with everything from Greek phalanxes all the way up to what's happening in Ukraine right now. And I have done hands-on almost all of this stuff, enough to at least say, when you write something, this doesn't feel right, rethink, and I can tell you why. So reach out to me if you're interested in that, because I've never done this before. My rates are very, very reasonable, which is to say we'll talk about what they should be, because I don't even know. So with that in mind, and again, I'll recap at the end, but I am available for editing and expertise, especially filling plot holes. That's something I seem to be good at. So next, disclaimer. This presentation, I know it says it there, but I'm going to read it because it's important. This presentation is how to use guns as a story tool. It is a 30,000 foot, 500 mile an hour overview of firearms from the dawn of the thing until today. And it is not focused on a giant data dump about firearms, but rather how to use them to enrich your story and drive your plot and build your characters. And so the attitude I took when building this is that firearms are a writing tool for constructing character and setting and providing enrichment, and should not be included for their own sake. Too much detail is bad. Just enough detail is good, but less is more. So if you want specific information on a type of firearm or a type of tactic or something like that, I would honestly suggest Wikipedia. There's a ton of really good technical information on there. It's pretty reliable. And since as a writer, you don't need to put in more than you absolutely need to put in, there's no reason to go down the research hole and spend days and days looking this stuff up if you can read a Wikipedia page and get what you want. And finally, I say here my opinion on the rest of this slideshow. There will be quibbles, exceptions. There will be things that are different than what I say, things that contradicted other people with other opinions. It is not, you should not say that this is authoritative, and were you to put me on the stand in court and tell me to swear to this stuff, I'd ask to go do a bunch more research. So this is not intended as the end-all be-all authority on anything about firearms, but rather to give you enough detail to write about it credibly and use it effectively in your story. With that in mind, if you stop listening after the next couple of sentences and you want one thing to take away from this, it is that when you are writing, don't put in more detail than you have to, and don't put in any detail about firearms that you don't have to. If you're writing a standard mystery and the goons for the mafia boss show up and you write, The goon pulled a semi-automatic pistol out of his pocket and pointed it at me and said, "Get in the trunk of my car." Right there, that is everything your reader in all likelihood needs to know about firearms. He has a semi-automatic pistol pointed at him and he's in danger. You've set the scene. The reader can draw their own picture of what that semi-automatic pistol looks like, and you can take whatever words you'd use to describe that it's actually a 40 caliber Glock with a safety block instead of a real safety, and it's loaded with jacket hollow point rounds. None of that's relevant to your reader, unless you choose to make it that way, but that should be a choice. So be judicious with firearm detail is the first and the biggest lesson of this presentation. Next, firearms basics, terminology, manufacturing, and operation. This is the mechanical how-to and the good enough on terms. This is to get the things that you would want to put in correct and to place firearms that are correct for a time period in that time period. So first off, some really basic terminology. In modern usage, there are mostly three types of firearm. Those are rifles, pistols, and shotguns. This has more or less been the case since the 1800s with exceptions, but that is what you're going to see today. The earliest firearms were not rifles. They were muskets, or other terms, firelocks, flintlocks. It varies, but they were smoothbore, which means the barrel was just a tube, and muzzle loading, which means that instead of the bullets going in the back, people would pour powder and then a wad of fabric or something similar, and then put a little lead ball in the tube and stuff it in there with a rod. So they were inaccurate beyond about 50 meters, and they used black powder. Over time, rifling became prevalent. It is grooves cut in the barrel of a rifle or a pistol, barrel of any firearm really, that impart spin on the bullet. And for the same reason that a top stands up on its own as it spins, the spin of the bullet makes it fly straight. It does drop because gravity is still a thing, but it doesn't wobble from side to side. A smoothbore, an old smoothbore, the lead ball would sort of beyond about 50 yards would start to just weave from side to side because of aerodynamics. So that said, rifles have been in use since the 1700s, but for a lot of reasons I'll get into in a minute, they've become more and more common because when they were first invented, they were very much a specialist piece of equipment. Modern rifles and pistols are all rifled. Shotguns are not. And modern weapons, rifles, pistols, and shotguns, are all breech loading, which means that the ammunition goes in the back of the barrel. To show you what that means, let me grab one of my visual aids here. If you're wondering, no, I'm not in California. If I was, I couldn't have this. I live in Idaho, not necessarily because I'm crazy about the state, but up here, you can buy one of these at Walmart. Down in California, it gets you put in jail. Don't see why civilians really need to own one of these. But that said, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, are you about to ask a question, or was that just a hand gesture?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Nothing.
Sorry, it looked like you were raising your hand. So this is AR-15, very standard. I didn't actually buy it. My dad bought it in 1989, and I inherited it when he passed away. But this is almost identical to what any soldier in the U.S. Army would have carried in Iraq. And so if it was muzzle loading, I would have to stuff the bullet in here. Because it is not, the bullet goes in here out of the magazine. I know you can probably only somewhat see in there, but this is the breech. The back of the barrel is called the breech. Also, you'll notice that I did not clear this when I picked it up, so I did not look into the weapon barrel and make sure there were no bullets in it. That's because I cleared it before the presentation. If someone handed me this weapon or I hadn't touched it in a while, I would have cleared it when I picked it up. So we'll get into clearing in a moment. Final note, shotguns are not rifled because they are intended to only be used at close range. That said, slugs with little fins that can stabilize them can be fired from shotguns so they can be shot further. But all modern firearms use smokeless powder. And finally, in terms of terminology, cannons, which you'll often hear about as a type of military hardware, and you'll also hear joking references to overly large pistols being hand cannons. But in typical discussion, a cannon is a weapon that can fire an explosive round. Not that they have to, but that they can fire a round that has explosive inside of it rather than the kinetic energy of the bullet being what damages the target. Now, you could theoretically put explosive inside a bullet of any size, so this isn't a hard and fast rule, but your ordinary rifle bullet doesn't have an explosive in it. So you could realistically call a pistol a rifle or a shotgun a gun, and it would be accurate. You could not call it a cannon. That would be a little strange and imply it's something it isn't. Next, we have sights, optics, and recoil. So this is the human element of it. This is where the skill of the shooter comes into play. So if you look at here, this is obviously a target through a scope. And over here, the shooter of firing is reacting to the recoil of the very large handgun she has, because obviously she's a young girl. And then on the bottom, you have various types of iron sights, a couple of which you will get to see if you come out to range day. But all of both a scope and an iron sight's one that has no lens, and it's not an optic. It's simply a post and a notch and a rear post on the barrel. In each case, what they serve to do is to align the end of the barrel with where the shooter is looking. So to explain how this works, let me grab another smaller visual aid. So this is a Glock pistol, and I'm going to clear it because I'm about to point it at my own face, which is disconcerting. So see how I lock the slide back, and then I'm looking in here to see if there is a bullet in the chamber. And again, we'll get to all this on range day, but how the sights work, here we have the rear sight post and the front sight post. And if you turn it this way, God, this feels wrong. You have the rear sights, and then you have this square notch and the front sight post. If you look through the rear sights and put the front sight post in the middle of the target, and then put the front sight post in the middle of the V notch or the U notch in the back of the gun, it lines your eye up in a straight line with where the target is. This is the fundamental aspect of how sights work. You need two posts on a weapon, or it does not effectively have sights. Because even if you put the front sight post on the target without the rear sight to ensure that it's lined up, the gun is lined up straight, you'll miss. So if you see someone, you'll see someone in fiction sometimes who will file the front sight post off to speed up their draw because this can catch on things. That means they can't aim. Food for thought. Anyway, when the shooter lines up the front sight post on the target and puts the front sight post in the middle of the rear sight, this is what's called getting a sight picture. And that is what it sounds like. It's the picture the shooter sees through the sight. It should be consistent. So each time the shooter looks at a target, they should be putting their eye in the same place relative to the sights and getting the same sight picture. And then the shooter, once they've got the sight picture, squeezes the trigger gently until the gun fires, and assuming that their sight picture was good and their sights are in proper alignment, the end of the barrel is exactly aligned with where the eye of the shooter is looking. The bullet travels down the barrel and the weapon fires. There's several ways people can screw it up. I'm going to demonstrate here, especially if it's a weapon that you hold on your shoulder. When you breathe, see my shoulder moved? You don't breathe while you're firing because it moves the end of the gun barrel around. The same with the pistol. You gently squeeze the trigger because if you do this, and I exaggerated that, but if you jerk the trigger very hard, it actually moves the end of the gun barrel down and makes you miss low. There's other aspects to shooting, sights and shooting. We'll go over some of them at range day, but this is all very much a skill thing. The shooter has to learn not to pull the trigger too hard. They have to learn to hold their breath before they fire if it's a rifle. They have to learn how to grip the weapon so that their body stabilizes it and it's not wobbling all over the place. It's all a skill, and it's a relatively easy skill to become competent at. It does take practice. This is also where you'll hear people say things about outshooting the gun. Some weapons are more accurate than others. We'll get into this in a minute, but it is possible for an extremely good shot to be held back by the mechanical limitations of the accuracy of the firearm. But in the modern era, that is also very rare. Most people miss because they screwed up. And the last thing to consider is that the sight picture provides at any meaningful range for the weapon limitation on how fast people can fire, because once you've got everything lined up, when you fire, recoil kicks the gun back and you lose your sight picture, and then you have to aim and get it back before you fire again. So this is why even with weapons that can fire extremely quickly, there's a practical limit on how many rounds someone can put downrange in a short period of time. It's not how quick the gun can cycle, it's how quick they can pick the sight picture back up and get back on target. And if you think about it, the more recoil a weapon has, the more it kicks away and the longer it takes to get back on target. So this is one reason why with firearms, bigger is not always better. So some quick firearm history. This is for all of you people that love period writing historically. So black and smokeless powder. Until the late 1800s, black powder was used, and it's large granules that are essentially composed of saltpeter, sulfur, and a third thing that I'm spacing on. But it was relatively straightforward to make. The thing about black powder relative to smokeless powder is that black powder burned very, very dirty. It created those enormous clouds of smoke that you see in historical reenactments of the Civil War or the Napoleonic Wars. And when you had hundreds of people firing in a line, the cloud of smoke they generated very quickly obscured their ability to even see the enemy. They were just shooting into the smoke. The other thing that's important about black powder is that because it burns so dirty, it would very quickly foul the weapons. So it would dirt, carbon, and salt compounds and stuff like that would build up in the weapon. Oh, that's the third thing, charcoal. You can technically, if you've seen that one episode of Star Trek, the original series, where Kirk makes a cannon out of a stick and gunpowder out of things he finds on the ground, it's only 3 components. But the upshot of this is that if you were to put black powder in a smokeless powder weapon, you might get a shot or 2 off. I'm honestly not sure. But the weapon would very, very quickly become so dirty that it would no longer operate correctly, because black powder weapons were built with a lot of slop and looseness in them to account for the fact that after a couple of shots, the gun was essentially going to be full of gunk. So to give you some idea, I could fire that AR-15 I was holding up a minute ago several hundred times before dirt building up even started to become an issue. In the Civil War, a soldier firing a rifled musket, because at the time many combatants had rifled muskets, would probably have to stop and clean out the barrel of their musket after about 40 shots, maybe less than that. So that's one reason why it was very important for soldiers in the Napoleonic or Civil War and earlier eras to have access to water on the battlefield, not just because they got thirsty, but also because you had to wash out your gun barrel if you shot enough. So yeah, smokeless powder, like it says, much less smoke, just a little bit, burns cleaner, burns faster, multiple types. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. Pretty much you can just say for the purposes of writing that it's a modern weapon and it fires with smokeless powder, and you're good to go. But they're not interchangeable. That is the big takeaway there. Also, for you mystery writers out there, there is smokeless powder or black powder hunting enthusiasts who use replicas or even old weapons loaded with black powder and make their own little, lead mini balls or lead musket balls to shoot with. And they have their own hunting seasons. And often, they get some allowances in what they're allowed to do because it's so much harder than hunting with a modern smokeless powder rifle. So it's not that it's impossible to get a black powder weapon these days or the materials to fire it. It's just less effective, and people only do it because they're basically hobbyists. Next, we move on to action type. So there is muzzle loading, which is where you have to stuff a new ball down the barrel every time you want to fire. Single action, where you have to individually load each bullet. Semi-automatic, where the weapon reloads a new round from a magazine every time you pull the trigger. So you could theoretically fire as quickly as you could pull the trigger, though realistically, you're still limited by the sight picture in most situations there. And then you have fully automatic, which is where the weapon fires as long as it has ammo and the trigger is held down. So there's no separate trigger pull required. And then finally, you have Gatling guns, miniguns, and chain guns, which often get confused and used incorrectly. So the Gatling gun was produced originally during the Civil War and used multiple rotating barrels driven by a crank to get around the fact that the weapon would get very hot and very dirty very quickly with black powder. And a minigun is a name originally for one type of weapon that was modern and used rotating barrels driven by an electric motor. but because it had lots of barrels, everything that has lots of barrels is now called a minigun many times, pun intended. And then finally, you have chain guns, which are driven by a chain internally, which are often confused for the multiple barrels of miniguns, but actually can have a single barrel. It simply means there's an electric motor driving the weapon's firing cycle. So, but again, it gets fuzzy because the guy who invented the Gatling gun by the 1890s had already hooked an electric motor up to a Gatling gun and turned it into what was basically a minigun. So if you're writing period fiction and you have a Gatling gun, remember there's going to be someone behind it literally turning a crank, and the faster they turn the crank, the faster it fires. But in the modern parlance, anything with a whole bunch of barrels is almost certainly a minigun or a Gatling style gun. And you can call it a chain gun if you want. People will probably know what you mean, but there are cannons with only a single barrel that are also chain guns. Also, if anyone has seen the excellent documentary on firearms from the 80s, the movie Predator, the guy carrying the minigun in that, Jesse Ventura's character, is one of the funniest things ever done with firearms in movie history, because he could have carried enough ammunition to fire for like 1.2 seconds. And then all his bullets would be gone, because that's how fast a minigun fires. When miniguns or mini style guns are mounted on vehicles, which is exclusively where they're used, you've never seen one carried by a person, they have tons and tons, well, okay, lots and lots of ammo, not necessarily tons, in the literal sense of tons, associated with them to keep them firing. So understand that while it might be really metal to give your hero a minigun because it's the fastest shooting gun in the world, unless you've got a forklift following him around with a pallet of ammo, it's actually not going to do him much good in a practical sense. So food for thought there. Ammo consumption matters. Ammo is heavy. If you join the Army, they'll have you carry multiple belts of machine gun ammo when you're playing infantryman, and you rapidly get to appreciate how much that stuff weighs. And so be judicious. Next, we have materials and machining. The long story short, the progress of firearms is driven by improvements in machining technology, not so much by conceptual things. So people thought a long time ago about building a multiple chambers, like a revolver, that could hold 6 bullets, and you could rotate each one to fire without reloading. In fact, this idea was even more attractive back when you had to individually load each round with a ramrod and powder. But for a long time, they couldn't make one that wouldn't explode because they weren't good enough at metallurgy. So if you're in a setting where there are firearms and people have access to crazy technology for whatever reason, even if they only have black powder, they could quite possibly have relatively quick firing weapons. It's just a question of what strength do you want their wizards to impart on the metal, if that makes any sense. Finally, we have modern firearm branding and what is an assault rifle. Again, it doesn't matter as much as you think it does. So in practical terms, this AR-15 is an assault rifle because it has a pistol grip, and it does not have a bayonet lug, but they're on a military version. Oh, I'm sorry, it does. You could clip a bayonet onto this, I believe. It's been a while since I messed with bayonets. So, but this is an assault rifle, right? It holds 15 rounds, shoots quickly, but this is a 30 caliber carbine, which was in full rate production in World War II. No pistol grip, no bayonet lug, shoots just as fast and just as accurately as an AR-15 at almost all ranges. So it depends. So this is functionally very similar to an assault rifle, even though it's got a wooden stock and it's 70 years old. When people talk about assault rifles with, gun policy and stuff, it's mostly being pedantic as an attempt to discredit people for not understanding what they're saying. In terms of shooting at people, weapons made 60, 70 years ago can be just as effective as a modern assault rifle that the Army would carry today. They just might look a little different. Next, clip magazine and rifle gun. You'll hear me saying gun. I don't like saying rifle. I can, but we've got rifles, pistols, guns. We're talking about all of them, so I'm using gun. And clip magazine. So if you look at the picture on the side there, the one on the bottom is a clip. The thing on top is a magazine, but so is what loads into an AR-15. or any other pistol. A magazine is a spring-loaded container for bullets. A clip is a metal clip that holds bullets. This matters because everything in the universe either has an internal or external magazine. So the magazine might be inside the weapon or it might be outside of it, except for the M1 Garand rifle that was issued by the Army during World War II. That used the clip, which you see on the bottom there. The issue with the M1 is that for many years, all the way past the Korean War, and therefore for something like 20 million Americans who were trained on the M1 Garand, they were told the bullets go in the clip and the clip goes in the rifle. Therefore, what is now what is a magazine was often called a clip. It's technically incorrect, but the distinction only matters if the person asking the question is trying to be a pedantic jerk. Same with rifle gun. Everyone knows what someone means. In the movie Full Metal Jacket, the Marines at basic training were made to march in a circle, grabbing their genitals and chanting about this, but that is not because the distinction is important. That is because they were recruits at Marine Corps basic training in the 60s, and the Marines wanted to shatter their souls. So that's that. Clip and rifle and magazine and gun are largely interchangeable. If you want to use them in a story and you want to have the distinction be called out, understand that unless there's something very important going on, most likely whoever is calling that out is just trying to be a jerk, not because using the different words has any real world meaning or significance. The only exception to this is artillery. Artillery is largely rifled these days, but it's still called guns because they were calling it guns for 500 years before rifling was invented, and artillery loves them some tradition. So it's still called the gun line. It's still called firing the guns, bring up the guns. All that stuff from back when cannons were smoothbore is still terminology used. Modern tank cannon are also smoothbore and called guns. Don't have time to get into why that is. And finally, mortars, which are not rifled and fire almost straight up, are called tubes. But in every case, you can say gun, you can say rifle, you can say pistol. No one cares. It doesn't matter. Next, we have using firearms, people, purpose, protection, and maintenance. First off, and this is the biggest thing to take away for your characters, the user typically matters more than the hardware. Firearms are easy to learn, but not always more lethal than other weapons. In close combat in a building, the world's most skilled knife thrower is every bit as lethal or more lethal than a skilled pistol shooter. The difference is someone can become a skilled pistol shooter in a few weeks. It takes years and years and years to get good at throwing knives. This has always been the case. The longbow was a more effective weapon than a musket, but it took a lifetime to learn to use the longbow, and it took a week to learn to use a musket. Generally speaking, with firearm users, you kind of get an array. A few are idiots, plenty of amateurs out there, but amateur doesn't necessarily mean dangerous or irresponsible. It just kind of means hobbyist. Quite a few are competent. You would see your average police officer or military member would probably fall into the competent. And then you have professionals who do it a lot, like infantry soldiers who have been doing it for a while, really properly trained SWAT teams, that sort of thing. Coordination between shooters is huge. It matters at least as much, if not more, than individual skill with the firearm. And an infantry squad, therefore, is a much more dangerous thing for your hero to fight than 10 guys who can shoot at the same time, because the infantry squad won't react the same way as 10 guys who can shoot. To that point, special forces use essentially the same firearms as infantry in their militaries, maybe a little more tricked out, a little different, but they're not fundamentally that different. What special forces has that makes them scary is their training and experience and coordination, not their hardware. And then finally, snipers are highly specialized. They're very, very good at hiding and very, very good at long-range fire. Won't get into that here, but again, there's plenty of good information on Wikipedia if you want to get real smart on snipers real fast. They have no magic that makes them unnaturally accurate, but especially in like the woods or somewhere like that, they spend a lot of time training on sneaking around and not getting found, which can make them significant. Also, in most military contexts, the most dangerous weapon a sniper has is their radio, because if they can call artillery on top of you because they can see you, that makes you just as dead as if they shot you and gave away their position and then had to displace. So snipers also function as scouts. in a military context. In law enforcement, not so much. Last point, stabilized weapons. I mentioned earlier that recoil breaks a sight picture. A vehicle locked into the turret on a tank has no recoil because it's locked in a clamp on a multi-ton turret. So the sight picture is not broken and it can fire continuously. This means that vehicle-mounted weapons are much more accurate than the same gun would be fired by a dismounted shooter, and even more so on a modern vehicle where they're hooked up to a laser rangefinder and a ballistic computer. Next, gun safety. This is important for showing your character's competence or not. First, biggest thing, trigger discipline. This is what I would notice right away. See how my trigger is not in, this is called the trigger guard? This is good trigger discipline. This is bad. Good, bad. I don't do this until the moment before I fire. The rest of the time, my finger's always out here. If I'm walking around, my finger's out here. I will never walk around like this because the moment you stumble, you squeeze the trigger. So if someone is walking around like this, poor trigger discipline, it's a dead giveaway they don't know what they're doing. Another one, holsters. Anyone who does this is an idiot. This is called, I want to grab the trigger by accident trying to pull this out of my belt and shoot myself in the femoral artery. Then I will bleed to death in less than a minute. So if I see someone walk up to me like this, I assume they know what they're doing. If I see someone walking around like this, I want them to get the hell away from me. Number one thing. Second, muzzle discipline. Always be aware where this is pointing. So anyone who is good at shooting will keep their weapon pointed towards the ground. Or if they can't do that, they'll keep it pointed straight up and away from anyone. If you see someone clearing a building and the weapon is forward like this, that's great. But it might be that, if I think there might be hostages on the far side of a door or something like that, I wouldn't even point the weapon at the door. That's backstop awareness and beyond. Bullets carry. Your standard AR-15 bullet can go through 5 or 6 sheetrock walls before it stops. And heavier weapons can go proportionately further. So it's important for your shooter, if they're a responsible person, to be aware not only of what they're shooting at, but what's behind what they're shooting at. Using the safety, this is a terrible example because it's a Glock and it doesn't exactly have a safety. But almost all weapons that are not Glocks come with a safety, and that safety has a little red dot. And 99% of the time, if the little red dot is visible, the weapon is ready to fire. And if the little red dot is not visible, there's something in the weapon that is physically preventing it from firing. Again, safety stays on until the shooter is prepared to fire. No one except special forces, because they have some weird ego thing going on sometimes, runs around with the safety off. So if someone comes up to me with a firearm, one thing I'm going to look at if I want to evaluate their competence is the safety on their weapon on, unless they're about to shoot. Clearing and making safe. If I hand a gun to someone and they have not just watched me clear it the moment before, they should pull the bolt back and inspect the weapon to make sure that there is no ammunition in it every time, no matter what. You don't trust other people with guns because that's how people get shot on accident. So if someone is being cavalier about clearing weapons and will just take one and not clear it every time it's handed to them, again, that shows that they are not necessarily very competent at gun safety. Next up, we have general attitude. Just how do they act with a weapon? Even if they get some of this stuff right because of training, are they acting like it makes their dick bigger, honestly? If someone's talking like their firearm is some sort of extension of their manhood or should make people afraid of them, right there, that tells me that they're probably a moron and I want them to go away. Next, shooting at stuff. Why people actually do it. So this is one of the things that's often overlooked. There's a military term called effective fire on target that we use to cover this. Effective fire on target means that there's two components. One, it has to hit the target, and two, it has to do what we want to the target when it hits. However, killing the target or incapacitating the target is only one possible effect. There's also what's called suppressing the target, which is when the rounds cause the target to not shoot back effectively and potentially not be able to move or react to something else. So you get two types of fire: aimed fire, which is intended to hit and incapacitate the target, and suppressing fire. You'll hear guys in war movies yell cover, and that means they're expecting, even even if they cannot see the enemy, they want everyone around them to stand or to poke their head out and shoot it where they think the enemy is, to make the enemy duck so that the person who's being covered can move. They're asking for suppressing fire. And finally, there's panic fire, which is when people are just shooting desperately, like in a horror movie when, you know, the army squad is being overwhelmed by the monsters and they're just blasting away because they're completely screwed. Panic fire is bad. And it's pretty easy to tell panic fire a lot of the time because it's just lots of shooting really, really fast. Likewise, for suppressing fire, there's what's called area weapons, which is like a machine gun at long range. The bullets are going to drift a little in the air. They're going to drop some, and you're not necessarily shooting at an individual human at 700 or 800 yards with a machine gun. Rather, you're seeking to put a whole bunch of rounds around that person's position to make them duck and keep them from trying to get up and displace. For these things, then, effects on target ammunition choice matters a lot. So there's everything from extremely high-speed armor-piercing bullets through full metal jacket bullets that have a relatively high amount of penetration, through jacket hollow point rounds that are hollow on the inside and designed to cause maximum damage to soft tissue at the expense of penetration, to achieve different types of ammunition effects, both how much the bullet weighs, how the bullet is shaped, and how much gunpowder is behind the bullet in the shell casing can all be varied. So snipers tend to have, you know, very high velocity bullets that are heavy with a ton of powder behind them. Air marshals, who are supposed to engage hijackers on aircraft in flight and don't want to shoot a hole out the side of the aircraft and depressurize it, have incredibly light, low velocity bullets. It depends what you're trying to do. There's a whole school of science called terminal ballistics, which is about when someone gets shot. The very quick and dirty version is that when a bullet hits someone, because we are mostly water, it creates a shock wave through the water, a hydrostatic shock, and that shock wave actually destroys tissue in a circle around where the round, or in a column around where the round hits, significantly bigger than the hole from the bullet itself. This is called the crush cavity, and in the crush cavity, which is essentially a huge bruise, it also, you know, tears stuff and damages it. The more a bullet fragments and spreads, the more soft tissue damage it does outside of that area. But at the same time, the less good it is at penetrating body armor and things. So essentially, a jacket hollow point round will put an unarmored target down faster because they'll bleed out more and whatnot, but it will not necessarily penetrate armor at all. Law enforcement, for their part, law enforcement does not do suppressing fire. They're not trained to do it. They shoot at the target. Doesn't mean they hit it, but they aren't shooting around the target to make it duck. Suppressing fire is military, because the military does fire and maneuver, which is where if you've got 10 guys in a rifle squad, 3 of them shoot at the enemy to make them duck, and the other 7 try and get around them, outflank them out of their cover. Law enforcement doesn't necessarily do that. And again, military vehicles and mounted weapons, because they're stabilized, can shoot very accurately with a lot of rounds, and are therefore going to be better at both precision and suppressing fire than those same weapons fired dismounted. But all that implies you've got a vehicle handy. So as your characters are thinking about shooting something, if they're professionals, they're going to ask, what effects is this going to produce on target? Body armor, again, quick and dirty overview. Classes 1 through 4. 4 is the highest, designed to protect against different threats. Bullets are the most threatening and best at penetrating. Fragmentation is from exploding rounds. Spall is bits kicked off the inside of an armor plate in a vehicle by the kinetic force of it stopping a bullet. So just because the armor stops something moving at very high velocity doesn't mean that that energy doesn't go anywhere. It can actually bounce things like screws or rivets or little shards of metal into the inside of the protected space. Body armor is typically heavy, and the more protection it offers, the heavier it gets. Our U.S. military standard flak jackets, or not, well, interceptor body armor in Iraq, with the ceramic plates in, weighed, I think, about 40 pounds. And you wear that running around in the heat for a while, you really start to feel it. You have soft armor, which is typically less protective, and it involves Kevlar in sort of a fabric pouch. It's only designed to stop lower velocity threats. And then you have hard ceramic armor, which is some sort of carbide plate, you know, very advanced, very heavy, that is rated to stop even most armor-piercing sniper rounds in the modern situation. But The modern body armor doesn't, the plate only covers like this. It's what's called the blood-bearing organs in the front and back. The rest of it's soft coverage, just designed to stop fragmentation, spent rounds, that kind of thing. So, and then if you do get shot with a high velocity bullet, there's what's called backface deformation, which is where, again, the kinetic energy from that round propagates through the armor, and it can break ribs, give you a giant bruise, that kind of thing. So just because someone gets shot doesn't mean that they're good to go, especially if they get shot with a high velocity round. The armor may stop it, but it could do everything from knock the wind out of them to break 4 ribs and put them out of the fight. Historical versions, it's important to remember that in history, if people were wearing armor, it probably did something. The gentleman on the right is wearing a cuirass, which is just a chest plate. But as late as the 1500s, it was possible to make a chest plate that would stop a flintlock bullet. So the cavalry and nobles wore those because they would stop a pistol round of the day, essentially. In World War II, bomber crews were issued flak jackets that would stop fragmentation from exploding flak shells. And in the 1900s, in the Philippine insurrection, some of the southern Moro tribes would even wrap themselves in multiple layers of tightly woven silk, which was enough to stop a low velocity pistol round from an officer's sidearm at the time. So even that could provide some protection. And to give you some idea of how effective modern body armor is, in 2003, in the invasion of Iraq, there was something like only 10% of injuries were serious from combat, whereas I want to say, pre-modern body armor, it would have been something closer to 25 or 30. And the serious injuries were almost always to the extremities, not to the torso. So they were much less likely to be life-threatening. So heavy, expensive, limits mobility, very effective protection against almost all threats out there. Maintaining guns. If you look at the end of the tank gun barrel there has been a malfunction. I will not say whose tank that was. I knew him, but to protect the guilty, he shall remain anonymous. There are 3 versions of maintaining a firearm. There is wipe down, which is simply opening it up and wiping out the interior with an oily rag, basically. Field strip, where you pull it partially apart, and full cleaning, where you take it all the way down as far as you can, lay the pieces out on a table, clean one each individually, re-oil it, put it back together. So which one your character might do would depend largely on how much time they had. None of them need anything more than a dirty t-shirt and a bottle of oil and maybe a barrel brush. So they're pretty simple, but if you take your weapon down for a full cleaning, it's going to take you a few minutes to get it back together. Whereas if it's just a wipe down, if you're just wiping out the inside with a rag, you pull the rag out and you're good to go. How often that has to happen depends on the environment. Even modern powder does leave some mess. So it leaves carbon, and then also the inside of the gun barrel will gradually get fouled with a combination of copper from the rounds jacketing, maybe some lead, and powder residue that has to be cleaned out, or gradually the weapon will become more likely to malfunction. In an extreme case, you can get a round stuck in the barrel. You have lubricants and solvents. So lubricants are oils that help the gun function. Solvents are things that break down that residue. They're not always the same, but in the case of the Army, they issue something called cleaner, lubricant, and preservative. It's all 3. However, many other firearms can be cleaned with specific carbon-oriented solvents. It varies. This will be relevant when we get to the brief portion on After the Apocalypse. Things that cause weapons to get dirty: moisture. If it's getting all full of water, that doesn't help. It can be from tropical rainstorms or from being underwater. Like Navy SEALs have rifles that are designed to let water drain out of them easily. But if it's in a really humid, wet environment, like a jungle where it's getting rain every day, then soldiers are going to be constantly breaking open their weapons, wiping the water out, applying more oil just to protect that metal. Whereas in the desert, you get, blowing dust, and dust can mix with oil to make really nasty, sticky mud. We ran into that a lot in Iraq, where the actual oil we used to keep the guns operating correctly would pick up so much dirt it would become a problem unto itself. And then, of course, mud. If a weapon is dropped in the mud, I'm not going to try to shoot it till I can check and see if the gun barrel is full of mud, because it'll explode if it is. Plus, mud just gets into the works and gums everything up. Modern weapons do wear. It takes a while, but they can wear out. And as barrels wear, weapons get less and less accurate. And then finally, the M16 is a great example, as is the AK-47, of different approaches taken to this for firearm design. I would recommend a book if you want to read more about it, called The Gun by C.J. Chivers. I believe that's how to say it, C.J. Chivers or Chivers. It goes into the concurrent development of the M16 and the AK-47, and why it is that initially the M16 was a complete disaster in Vietnam, whereas the AK-47 performed extremely well. I won't go over it here, but if you want to become able to write with some authority on the subject, that book will get you more than far enough. So firearms and writing, wrap up here. Firearms or character building, this is just questions you should ask yourself. If you want to have a character holding a firearm, why are they doing it? Is it because it's part of their job? Do they need it for work? Is it for protection? Is it because they want to look like a badass? Are they doing the crimes? Some combination of the above. How practical is their gun for the purpose? How well does it work? You know, if somebody is claiming to be a soldier and they've got some gigantic hand cannon pistol with gigantic bullets that, you know, they can only fire one every 15 seconds because it takes them that long to get the gun back on target, they may not actually know what they're talking about. The same with someone who claims to have a gun for home protection and then loads a AR-15 with armor-piercing rounds. Burglars are very unlikely to have body armor that requires armor-piercing rounds, but those armor-piercing rounds would be very likely, if you miss the burglar, to go out their house and into their neighbor's house. Says something about them as a person. How good is their gun safety? I already went over that. If you want examples of bad gun safety, YouTube abounds with videos. But if they're bad at it, that tells you something. If they're good at it, that tells you something. How responsible are they with their gun? Not merely in gun safety, but are they leaving it out where people could get it? Is it stored loaded? Is it stored somewhere a kid could find it? Do they have a holster? I know I demonstrated earlier that it's bad to stuff a gun in your pants. Holsters exist for a reason, and yet many people don't use them. And that actually is quite unsafe. Next up, how is their weapon maintained? Within the constraints of what can be done in your setting, if your main character gets a hold of one of the, he partners up with another bounty hunter because he's a bounty hunter in the Old West, and the guy's weapon is all dusty and full of dirt and there's no oil in it. That other guy clearly doesn't or know how to or won't maintain his firearm because it's very likely to malfunction when he tries to use it. And then finally, accessories. What extra stuff is stuck to their gun? You can always go on Amazon and hit add to cart and it will suggest purchases. A lot of people who buy cool military looking hardware to look badass, they'll just keep strapping things to a rifle until it's half again as heavy as it should be and it's hard to hold correctly. And, it's like they got a flashlight on there, which the cops use sometimes. But the reality is if you're walking through a darkened building with a flashlight on your rifle, yeah, you can see what the flashlight's pointing at, but everybody can see you. So you probably wouldn't see professionals doing that in a lot of situations. Sometimes yes, usually no. Same with laser sights. They point two ways. So we had guys on the base in Iraq who would, they'd have like big knives, and one guy had like a tomahawk that he carried around with him everywhere and all this other garbage. And you just looked at him and it was like, what are you doing, bro? We are running convoy security in Iraq. We do not need to carry an axe. The going out the wire, we carried ammo, water, batteries, basic gun cleaning, radio. That's about it. You didn't have all this crazy extra stuff. That doesn't just go for guns. If you see someone who shows up to whatever it is and they've got 50 pounds of additional gear strapped to themselves and there isn't a real good reason for it, that says something about how professional and serious they actually are about what's going on. Next, we have riding gunfights. First thing to take away from this is that there's often acceptable breaks from reality in a way in big gunfights, because in really big gunfights, things get kind of random, especially if there's explosives going off. Your main character probably going to have some plot armor, if they're going to survive multiple big gunfights without even getting clipped, because there's what's called the golden BB, which is that, that grenade that the other guy threw over the wall that he didn't even know if there was anyone over there. He was just checking, goes off, and even though your guy hit the dirt, the golden BB gets him in the knee, and now he can't walk. Bad luck, it happens. You obviously can't necessarily do that to your main character if there's still more book to write. So understand that it's okay to just randomly schwack characters in a gunfight. It's totally believable because people aren't even necessarily shooting at a target they know about. They can be laying down suppressing fire, and the guy cranking the wheels on the artillery cannon 5 miles away has no idea what he's shooting at, but he's shooting trash cans full of high explosives. So he doesn't have to get particularly close to ruin your day. But that doesn't mean you need to whack your characters for sure. It's up to you. Next, leaders try to control chaos. So if you are writing something and the villain's chief henchman has brought his goon squad to oppress the villagers in your character, if the chief henchman is in the thick of the gunfight shooting, he's not doing his job. If he is a serious mercenary, say, his job is to control the chaos and get all of his riflemen shooting at your hero's intrepid companions. If he's actually just shooting, he's not directing his people because he's looking down the barrel or the sights of his gun, engaging targets. And then a couple of considerations when writing gunfights. How well trained are the different sides? It's a great way to show professionals versus people who are not is if they're obviously if they're obviously capable of shooting straight. Are they capable of moving as a team? Do they have hand signals, or do they all have to talk a whole bunch before they do something? How did they coordinate? And did they start with a plan? If they started with a plan, how can that plan go haywire? Things to think about. And then finally, is there a hardware mismatch? It matters to a point, but if one side has more firepower than the other, that's going to change things. But I would still say that if you have unprofessional idiots with a bunch of firepower and professionals with much less, the professionals are going to do better because, again, it's more about the skill of the people than it is about the hardware specifically. Finally, setting building with firearms. Some questions as you flesh out your setting. What firearms are available for bulk production? I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that rifles were available in the 16 and 1700s, but unlike muskets, which could be produced in pretty large numbers because they were literally a tube put on a wooden shoulder stock, a rifle had to be made by an expert gunsmith, and then because there was no such thing as standardized machining, it had to be individually sighted by the shooter who knew how to use it, and it was harder to maintain, and the bullets were harder to make. So rifles were very much an artisanal product. They were an individual, one-off, tons of man hours to build compared to a musket piece of equipment, and therefore very expensive. Next, how do people get guns? Can they walk into a gun store like here in America, or is it the black market, or can they have them fabricated from a replicator? Do they have to scavenge them from the ashes of society, perhaps? How do they get them? Question worth asking. How are they trained to use them, or are they? So if you want to learn to use a firearm, is it a skill passed down in your warrior clan as part of the gun fu that they learn as children? Do you have to go find an instructor or a hologram, or how do people get training? Because without training, firearms are very much less effective. Yeah, point gun that way, gun go bang, person die is an easy theory to grasp, but the specifics can be kind of a bear. What do they cost? How hard is it to get one? How do people react to someone carrying them? Problem we have here in Idaho is that for reasons that escape me, idiots will carry their rifles around in public, loaded. I react poorly to that. I don't think there's any reason to carry a loaded assault rifle around in Subway. It's just no. But alas, I live in Idaho. How effective are the tools for detecting them? Whatever the firearms in your setting are. How easy is it to smuggle them into places? You can build, a lot of security and plot driving stuff around the need to get weapons into places where they might not otherwise be permitted. But in your steampunk setting, are there gun-sniffing, genetically engineered rats with bat wings? I don't know. But how do you conceal guns and how do you escape having them detected? Doomsday prep. If someone is truly prepping for the apocalypse because interchangeable parts matter, they would have a whole bunch of the same gun. So I wouldn't, if I was prepping for the apocalypse, and I'm not, but if I was, I wouldn't have 20 different assault rifles from all over the world. I would have 20 copies of the same rifle so that after civilization fell and I couldn't get more parts, I could take parts from the broken ones as they wore out or got broken and use them to fix the other ones. Same with ammo. I wouldn't have a giant bunker full of different kinds of ammo. I'd have a giant bunker full of one kind of ammo. And then after the end, if you want to write in a post-apocalyptic setting, chemistry matters for firearms. So it might be possible to make black powder, but not smokeless powder, which is more difficult in chemistry terms to make. Or the smokeless powder people could make might be very low quality and dirty guns much more quickly than the designers, assuming that everyone would have high grade stuff before the apocalypse, had pictured. So the guns would malfunction quickly. Oh, another terminology thing. A gun that jams has malfunctioned, but not all malfunctions are jams. That said, if someone says my gun is jammed, your audience will know what it means. So it's kind of a pedantic distinction. Don't sweat it. And finally, after the end, another thing to consider is gun oil. It's light oil. It evaporates. It has a limited lifespan. Even if a gun is put in a case and kept on a shelf, eventually it will dry out. Modern firearms require oil to operate correctly. And you can't just put some olive oil in there. It doesn't work. It has to be fairly specialized petroleum products. And again, you need ideally solvents as well to help clean the weapon. So after the apocalypse, how are people going to get gun oil? There'd be a lot floating around for the first few years. And after that, it might get real precious and scarce. So, no, it doesn't go bad. It's not like it goes rancid. If you found a bottle that had been sitting on a shelf for 100 years, it'd still be fine. But how do people maintain their firearms? If you have your intrepid hero Larry the Lawman gun down a bunch of bandits running around in bondage leather and with crossbows, and one of them has a gun, he might go to that guy after he shoots him, and literally the first thing he searches for on his body would be his little thing of gun oil in the hopes that he has it. So something to think about there. There's all the supporting technology for firearms that might or might not exist in your setting, and how can you leverage that to make a more interesting, detailed, and tense story. So conclusion, again, if you found some of this helpful and you have specific questions or you just want to brainstorm ideas, I'm available. All I ask is that you give me some quantity of money. We can discuss what that is. So second to that is the range day sign up. That should already be at the top of chat. We put it in before the start of the presentation. But if you click that link, it will take you to a web page with a sign up form. All it needs is your name, email, and any comments about any special restrictions on mobility or diet or whatever else, or if you want to bring a friend, type them in. It just emails me, or if it's easier, you can also use that email address, and I will get back to you individually, both to potentially hire me for editorial stuff, or alternately, if you wish to attend the range day next month. Reach out either way. It's up to you for what's easier. Finally, thank you for your time, and I will at this point move on to questions.
Can you hear me all right, Karl?
I can.
Okay. What time on May 19th do we start that? Was that like 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning?
I want to say 9:30.
Okay.
I still have a little bit of final planning to do, so assume mid-morning and then plus or minus a half hour around 9:30. I want to give people time to get there, but I can't start too late because we have to get through the whole thing.
And on that same note, there's several people that can't make it on the 19th. Would you be willing to have another range day at another time? I know you're in
There will
Idaho,
be
so it
another
makes a
one
difference.
sometime in about 6 months later. So
Okay.
sometime approximately in November, date to be determined about a month after the May event.
Good. Question, what is the Barilli shotgun, automatic or pump, 12 gauge? What type of 00 shot can penetrate an engine in an automobile? I guess that's multiple questions.
So define penetrate an engine. Because if you want to put holes in the radiator so that it dries out and stops in 5 minutes, almost any shotgun could probably do that. Radiators are made out of thin aluminum. If you want to put a hole in the engine block, odds are a shotgun isn't the right weapon anyway. You might be able to do it with a slug, but even then it's pretty low velocity. When we were in situations in Iraq where we wanted to be able to stop a car, we used a 50 caliber machine gun, which is a whole different realm from any shoulder fired shotgun.
When you're talking about the, you said electric, or did you mean battery powered? I think you were talking about the chain gun and the Gatling gun.
So
Was that a battery operated when they made it electric?
So the original, the guy who invented the Gatling gun, he actually hooked up a standard electric motor to it. I would assume it plugged into something like a generator because back then batteries were not great.
Yeah.
In a modern sense, I would guess that they could be battery powered, though if they're mounted to a vehicle, they're going to be wired into the vehicle's power system. Like the picture of the one on the boat probably had a battery. But all it is an electric motor that spins. I mean, conceptually, it's no different than the one that powers your blender. It's not some fancy technology.
There was some confusion about clip and magazine, and also on the same note, a speed loader. Is that considered a clip?
So a clip is a metal clip that holds bullets. It's pretty much only applicable to the M1 Garand. Every other weapon has a magazine, which is either an internal or external spring-loaded place where the ammunition is placed. A speed loader is for a revolver, or at least it can be, and it's 6 bullets on a little thing, like a little widget already configured to slide into the cylinders on the revolver. So I guess it's classified as a speed loader. It doesn't go into the weapon in any which way. You slide the bullets in with it, and then it releases them, and you take it away.
On our same clip magazine, one person said they had trouble at the shooting range because it took a lot more strength than they knew to load it.
Yes, stuffing rounds into a magazine can actually be pretty labor intensive. And one thing that people often mistake, because it never comes up in computer games, right? You just walk over a pile of ammo and magically it's all in magazines. So, say Bob has shot up all but 4 rounds in his magazine, and he's about to charge into a room where there are bad guys. Even though his weapon isn't technically empty, he might drop the magazine and load a fresh one, so he's not out. But at the same time, then the question is, do you stuff the magazine with 4 rounds and back into your magazine holder or your pocket? It's only got 4 bullets, but if you drop it on the ground, you're short 4 bullets you could save. And in prolonged gunfights, running out of magazines is an issue, because if you want to load more, someone has to step back and stuff more rounds into each magazine by hand. And there are ways, like for M16 magazines, there's little metal loaders that make it easier, but it still isn't effortless or instantaneous. So like when we're at the rifle range as an Army unit, there's 5 guys in the ammo shack just sitting there stuffing rounds so everyone else can do their target shooting to qualify for the year. So food for thought, an average policeman might only carry 3 magazines, 1 in their sidearm and 2 in their belt. If they're in a long gunfight, they're going to be sweating whether or not they should drop those and reload and win. And then typically if a magazine is completely empty in a real gunfight, you do just let it fall on the ground. But yeah, putting rounds in a magazine as it gets close to capacity because you're pushing against a spring is actually pretty labor intensive. Your thumbs get tired in a hurry.
Question on miniguns. Do they need to be bolted or secured in some way?
Yes.
Okay.
They really move around a lot because every round they fire has recoil. And so they tend to move off target very quickly. When you see weapons fired in Hollywood, including the minigun in the documentary known as Predator, which is up there with another documentary, Terminator, and of course, let's not forget Flash Gordon, the movie from that time period. Hollywood weapons are adapted to fire with blanks because blanks have no recoil and they have much less powder. They're just designed to look like they're shooting. So the weapons are designed to operate off of a reduced powder charge, which means they would explode if you fired a real round through them. And because they're not actually pushing a bullet down the barrel, which is the source of the overwhelming majority of the recoil, they don't kick back, is I guess the best way to put it. And so in Hollywood, you see people just, nonstop. There's no recoil. If they tried to do that in real life, the gun would go whoop, and they'd be up here in 6 rounds. Excuse me. So in the case of the minigun, yeah, it has a ton of recoil. It's firing incredibly fast. And so the way the weapon is balanced and the way it's mounted on a stake or on an armature is specifically designed to counteract that so that the shooter can keep it on target.
You kind of answered this question earlier, but the question was, can a carefully stored vintage weapon, e.g. World War II sidearm, be used immediately and function effectively without cleaning or other maintenance?
Absolutely. If you were to, and this has happened as late as the 90s, that World War II carbine that I showed you, World War II weapons all the way up through Vietnam were packed in a substance called cosmoline, which was almost like a Vaseline, but it was a preservative. And you could take, if something was still in its original packing, packed in cosmoline from World War II, you could pull it out, wipe the cosmoline off, load it, and it would shoot. It would be effectively brand new. It's only poor storage that really causes issues.
Okay. What are the most common firearms mistakes you read about or see in movies and TV?
There's a few. A lot of them are Hollywood stuff. Like, again, I mentioned that people, since Hollywood weapons don't have recoil, everybody just shoots real fast because it looks cool. Another one is because there's no recoil, shooters use weapons much larger than they should be able to in very casual ways. Like, you have the guy, who's shooting the Desert Eagle 50 caliber enormous pistol that weighs like 12 pounds and it'll break your wrist if you don't brace properly. And he's just like, yeah, because there's no recoil. They will show people going down the instant they're shot, which is not necessarily correct. Unless you hit the central nervous system, which is essentially the brain or spinal cord, someone will continue to function if they don't go into shock and pass out until they run out of oxygen in their bloodstream or their brain is deprived of oxygen and they fall down. If you were to shoot someone in the heart, point blank, destroy their heart, they've got probably 10 seconds of oxygen before they pass out. They're Walking Dead, man, but you'd be amazed how many times someone can stab you in 10 seconds. Likewise, people who are crazy, or in other cases, say zombies who don't feel pain, a shot to the chest isn't going to stop them. They're just going to keep coming because they're not registering they've been hit. And it really conveys no more physical force to move them backwards than a hard thrown fastball. The fact it punches a hole right through them doesn't catch up until later. So it's convenient in the movies to have people get shot and then just fall over because then the audience knows, oh, they're dead. In reality, that doesn't always happen.
How about racking the receiver to eject a shot before they...
So if someone walks up and they're like, I'm gonna shoot you, what they just told me was that they were threatening me with a gun that wasn't loaded.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks cool, but if I'm pointing a gun at someone, I actually want a bullet in it. That's just me. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a Hollywoodism. And if they do that and a bullet flies out, then I guess they didn't want that bullet anyway. I don't know.
Okay,
but yeah,
which
nobody. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You go ahead and finish.
Oh yeah, anyone who is racking the slide on a weapon or cocking the weapon is being rather silly. The only exception is, and I don't have anything I can demonstrate it with on hand, but for weapons that have a hammer, I mentioned that pulling the trigger too hard moves your point of aim downward and makes things less accurate. You can cock the hammer back, and then when you pull the trigger, the hammer releases, and that's a very, very low force action. If the hammer isn't cocked back on a lot of weapons, pulling the trigger will move the hammer back and then release it forward when it's moved all the way to the rear. But then you're pulling against the tension of the spring that will drive the hammer forward, and therefore it's much, much harder to maintain a consistent point of aim. So if someone racks the slide, they're a clown. If someone is, pointing a weapon at Bob's head and clicks the hammer back, then they're just made themselves be slightly closer to firing. Though realistically in that situation, it's for show. Like, you're already pointing a loaded weapon at someone's head, so the threat's already there. But it adds tension, right?
Yeah. Okay, which is more popular with criminals? 9mm, 40, 22?
Whatever they can get. I mean, your average gangbanger or other criminal is not making learned judgments on the overall relative attributes of 9mm versus 40 cal. Even in the military, I don't really care. They're close enough for government work. We use 9mm in the U.S. Army. The Oakland Police Department uses 40 caliber. But the most common weapon for murder in America is the 22 long rifle, which is a much smaller bullet. not because they're more dangerous, they're not. They're a smaller, low velocity bullet, but just because they're really cheap and easy to use and easy to get. And so the total number of people shot with them is so much higher than anything else. They're the most common for murders. Total proportion of people shot with them who die is actually lower. So with criminals, don't overthink it. If someone has the wherewithal to carefully evaluate firearm choices to be a criminal, then they are a hitman, or I don't know, a mafia enforcer or something. And then they're going to have the knowledge to assess things like, what do I prefer? What's easier to hide? What fits better in my hand? Or even what's cheaper if you're going to burn up a lot of ammo. I mean, bullets cost money. So, but then it's going to be subjective questions, not just what's objectively better for doing the crimes. So, and it's very rare you would see a criminal making a judgment like that. Most of the time, it's going to be whatever gun they could get a hold of for whatever money they had on hand.
Here's a technical question. What's the best way to check a magazine before loading to make sure the spring tension is still at the right level and the ammunition will function properly?
Push the bullets down with your thumb. But if the magazine is loaded, the spring tension won't change once it's loaded. Springs don't degrade when they're compressed. They actually become less effective when they release. But you'd have to put a lot of rounds through a magazine to make the spring lose tension. You will see, and you would see me do this with an M16 or an M4. The bullets like to move forward in the magazine sometimes, and then they grate against the front and it makes malfunctions more likely. So if I've been doing running and jumping and all sorts of stuff and shaking my bullets all around, I'll tap the magazine, the back of the magazine, against my boot or my helmet or a rock to knock all the bullets back into place before I load it. But that's an M16 specific thing. Like, other weapons don't necessarily have that problem. Yeah, just pushing down on them with your thumb, perfectly fine. And you might, like, if you'd been crawling through mud, or it wasn't your magazine, you were pulling it out of the cold dead fingers of one of the bad guy's minions or whatever, you might look at it, just look and be like, is this obviously damaged or filled with dirt or something? You know, if you were in a raging gunfight, maybe not, but it's that sort of basic due diligence. You know, you're not going to detect any careful sabotage or traps, but just looks okay. That's usually adequate. These aren't terribly complex machines.
Well, the last question I had, well, no, I don't. I got another one here, but here's what was the gun of choice for the Mafia between 2008 and 2010? If you're an expert on the Cosa Nostra.
I have no idea. It would just, again, it would be a semi-automatic pistol. That's really, like, you know, it's reliable, it's compact, kills people pretty good. You can get a lot of different varieties. My question for Mr. or Mrs. Pearson, whoever you are, would be, what is, and I will happily answer this here also kind of as an example of the consulting thing, what is your mafioso trying to do? Is it a gun they want to keep for self-defense, or is it a gun they're going to ditch as soon as they kill someone with it so that it can't be traced back to them? Like, it's all those questions. Why do they have their gun? So for enforcers, assuming that they were planning to use it, and they were planning to use it at short range, you know, they weren't going to get in a long range gunfight, which the mafia doesn't like to do because they don't like practicing with guns, then it would be something really cheap. Because if you kill someone with it, you want to get rid of it. So why would you spend, you know, $3,000 on a top of the line personalized firearm when the moment you actually use the damn thing to whack somebody, you're going to have to get rid of it? The sign up for the range event should be all the way at the top of the chat. And I think I can just throw it in here again, actually.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay. Let me know if that doesn't work. So yeah, and if you want to go more into detail on sort of the mechanics of, or not the, get into the weeds on law enforcement and firearms, you know, it's not quite like CSI, but I would honestly say if your enforcers are planning to use their guns, and they really expect to, they would go to a pawn shop and buy something super cheap for cash. And then whatever it was, they'd immediately drive out to the New Jersey Turnpike and throw it in the ocean or something. So let's see. What might a female private investigator carry if she isn't a former cop or former military? My question there would be, how much is she willing to practice? because again, proficiency is not difficult to attain. She could carry whatever she wanted. I would just be a question of, does she have the time, money, and effort to go to the shooting range and fire off enough rounds that she was comfortable with it, and practice things like quick drawing it from wherever she has her holster, because everyone, based on their clothing, their job, their personal preference, is going to carry weapons in different places about their person. The quickest draws are from the hip, but also it's hard to conceal a weapon at your hip. So, and then the last consideration, is she a big person? Because some of the larger firearms, in particular, so you've got the magazine well here, right? A lot of weapons, see how relatively wide this is? Like, I'm sorry, let me hold that in front of the camera. You've got your magazine well where the magazine goes. The bullets stack side by side in this, because this is a Glock. I'm 5'10" and a half. I'm not a small guy. And see, this fits easily in my hand. As I recall, when Jen was at the range, Jen is not a large person. Some of the larger firearms were kind of hard for you to hold because your hands aren't that big. So if she's a small, like really petite, she might choose like, and this is a 40 caliber, she might choose a single stack 9mm because the bullets aren't side by side, so the handle's a lot narrower, so it's easier for her to get her grip around it. So it's again, it depends how you want to write your character. She could be 5'1" but have big hands and happily use anything I could use. It's up to you. So ghost guns and 3D printers. I'm not entirely read up on that. I know that they can make a lot of pieces and parts. I don't think that they can 3D print the actual barrel and the breech, the actual place where the round detonates, because I don't think anything readily available can 3D print that strong yet. They still have to cast it as a single piece of steel and then bore it out. So now that said, if you could get a breech without a serial number on it or something like that, and I don't know where serial numbers are hidden all over guns in a lot of cases, but you can also buy one at a gun show and have theoretically no trace to it. You know, again, it's complicated and it depends. Ghost guns might eventually be a thing, but I think you still need some sort of metal professionally made parts, even if you could 3D print like the handle and even maybe the slide. And even then, I expect it would have a lot to do with how good is your 3D printer. One thing that, so one great story, I don't know if this is true or not, but it sounds like it should be. In the 80s, a bank on the island of Honolulu was knocked over by like 6 guys who were super professional, like in and out in 90 seconds, had a guy calling time, perfect trigger and muscle discipline, showed up exactly when the truck was unloading like millions of dollars, and they were gone. Perfect robbery, no evidence left behind, didn't hurt a hair on anyone's head. By the time the cops even arrived, they'd been gone for 5 minutes. And they were all apprehended within an hour because it was the Marine Corps counterterrorism SWAT team from the base. And when the FBI arrived, they watched the video once and said, how many groups of men on this island are there who are good enough to do this? And the answer was 2 special forces groups, the FBI SWAT team and the Marines. So all they did was verify the location of all the members of each group. And since the Marines didn't have a good answer, it's a real easy case to crack. Now, again, I don't know if that's true, but if it happened, it would be, if that makes any sense. Because like your average criminal has no idea what they're doing. 6 guys acting like special forces. That begs a question.
I'm gonna look that up now.
Yeah, I think that's the last of our questions. So I guess I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Karl. This was fantastic, and it's also being recorded, so you can catch up or rewatch it if you'd like. And don't forget, if you are available on May 19th, the sign up is in the chat. It was also in his presentation, and we'll send out an email maybe early next week with that information as well. Again, thank you so much for spending all this time with us, Karl. It was fantastic.
Yep, and
a lot of good questions too.
Yeah, and I will hang out here for a minute if anybody has any questions about the range day itself or any follow-ups that occur to you. I've got a moment, so I'll stay here. But yeah, thank you all very much for attending, and I hope to see you next month.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. That was great. Wonderful.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay.
I do, if I can ask it here without using the chat.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, typically what type of gun would a bodyguard carry?
Probably most likely some kind of semi-automatic pistol. Because again, easily concealable, fast to reload, easy to use, and it's small, so it's easy to use in confined spaces. Because waving a rifle around, you've got this 4-foot stick, and that can act, or a 3-foot stick. This can actually be pretty hard to use in tight spaces. If somebody gets, a hand on the barrel and pushes it aside, now you're in a fist fight. But again, if it was a bodyguard who was worried about larger threats or something, or being stopped by bandits on the road, they might carry a rifle. It's what the answer to that question is, more than anything, what threat is the bodyguard concerned about? Crazy people, assassins, whole special forces teams hitting the target. Yeah, kung fu masters. If it was like a kung fu master who could move so fast that you could barely track them, the bodyguard might literally carry a shotgun, so the spread would make them more likely to get a hit.
Yeah, this would have to be a handgun.
Yeah. Generally speaking, for everyday violence in a normal sort of day-to-day life scenario, the answer is going to be a handgun. And it's going to be a semi-automatic because they're just easier to use and faster to reload and hold more bullets than a revolver.
Can you give
Revolvers.
me
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can you give me an example of just
A Glock,
okay.
A Colt 45, anything from Sig Sauer. There's
Sig Sauer, that's the one I liked, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, and if you're writing a book, I wouldn't even specify. There's no reason to take up 50 words to tell your character, unless your bodyguard has a reason to care a lot. Then you have to specify and convey to your reader why your bodyguard would care. There's no reason for anyone to care beyond it's a black semi-automatic pistol. What kind of gun it is.
I don't go into detail with it, but I'm just the type of person I have to know myself in the background so I know what I'm doing with it. And so I look
Gotcha.
up stuff about it, but I don't include everything. So
Yeah,
thank
that's
you very
fair.
much. This was an awesome presentation. Thank you so
It
much.
was, it really was.
So, and last thing, I saw there were some people up in Oregon. I live in Boise. I mean, if you can make it out drop me an email. Like, if you can make it out here, I can do the same thing, but here. So.
Great. Well, thank you again, Carl. Really appreciate it. I'm so looking forward to next month. And hope to see some of you there as well.
Yep.
Right. Have a great rest of your day. And then if you're in Sacramento, don't forget to stop by Face in a Book for Claire Booth's book signing. Thank you so much.